Welcome back everybody, and we are continuing on with the natured inspired theme. This time we're playing with some Tyranid Neurogaunts, and we've already based the little guys. And if you haven't seen the video looks at Liquitex's Modeling Paste to create the spiky bases to emulate the spikes that come with the little fellas. And initially we're going to be just undercoating them and then using a zenithal, because the desire or the plan is to use some contrast paints to create the initial sort of coloration. And the idea here is to use nature inspired, and I thought what better than to start with than perhaps maybe looking at wasps, European wasps in particular, black and yellow banding. They inspire fear or instill fear into people because they get stung massively, chewed on, the whole thing. So they're kind of nasty. I thought that was rather appropriate for these little chaps. And so the color scheme therefore is to be a form of black and yellow. And I started with the Eandean yellow as the contrast color to place as a base, upon which then I would sort of increase some highlights and then also put the dark coloration using the Uriel yellow. That was diluted slightly and placed along the armor plates, on the trailing edges of most of the armor plates, the back of the spines, and in some areas along the legs. To sort of just create those color details. Now it's, I guess to some extent it takes a little bit of time to develop the color. It's not, I'm not putting it on thick. The reason is that you're trying to avoid obvious sort of distinctions between one color and the next. So we're looking for some form of blending, and keeping it thin tends to allow you to get progressive build-up of the color. Similarly with the dark coloration that was chosen, and I wanted to go for a chromatic black rather than just straight black because it has a bit more interest and character, and I thought yellow and green would look quite good, and so I mixed the black in with the green. Now I chose to use Speedpaint. This is Army Painter's Speedpaint 1.0, the original Speedpaint that has the reactivation issues, but it's not an issue if you plan to use it as such. And so the benefit of having something that does potentially reactivate is that you tend to get better blends, particularly where you've got a light and a dark color coming together. And it doesn't have to be done wet blended, you can do it after the fact. So that allows you to progressively build up the color as you see fit. And if you need to go over it again, it's at least going to give you a nice progression, and it'll get rid of those tight lines and obvious sort of hard, sharp distinctions that don't look particularly natural. And it did take several coats to go in there, and just bit by bit trying to build it up progressively once it was all mixed in. And the color does work relatively well against the green. And the beauty again also of the speed paint is while it's moist, you can go in with a wet brush if you have overcooked it, and because the nature of speed paint tends to be that it runs and it will run into recesses, and sometimes it ends up where you don't necessarily want it to be. So at least you can come in with a wet brush and wick some of that off and also wash it away, allowing you to continue without having a big mess. So that works relatively well. And once the colors are on, it did look effective. I did have some spots and other features on some of the body parts, but just looking at it, I thought it looked a little bit two-dimensional and needed a little bit of a lift, and therefore I decided, look, I might actually go in and add a color. And the orange, or in this case it was actually, I think, Wild Rider Red, was used to dry brush on. Now it probably wasn't as dry a brush as it could have been because I got more sort of streaking, and that was my mistake. I would have preferred if I'd actually wicked off some, but it looked pretty thin at the time, but once it hit the model, clearly it was a little bit more than I had anticipated. But the end result still looked okay with a sort of a pinky orange over the top of the yellow, so it still was quite effective, and I thought it just lifted the model to where it needed to be. Given that I just tried it with the yellow, I thought, let's just suck it up and try a few other colours just to see if the scheme works in different colour tones. And so it chose an orange and a red rather than the yellow, and just replicated the same process in terms of building up the colour and starting with the orange. So the light colour first and then doing the dark over the top. Again going for a chromatic black, this time on the orange using a dark brown and potentially mixing that in with again the black of the Speedpaint. So same system. I figured if it worked the first time, we'll try it again the second time round, and the dark brown black mix wasn't too bad. It did bleed, did create some sort of obvious tide lines between where it was placed and where it ended up pooling, so it did require again touching up to go back in just to finish that and make it look a little bit more neat, but the final result still worked well, and you've still got that flexibility with the speed paints to modify things as you go if you make a bit of a mistake. So it is forgiving, which is great. And over the orange I decided to use a darker red, this time a Fiston red, and I made sure that I had wicked off most of the paint, so the dry brush was just that, a dry brush. And lucky last, we went in with the red, and from the red then we decided to build up and again use the trailing edge with a brighter red, but as you can see by chance that it actually just happens to be very similar to the Speedpaint red, so the distinction isn't particularly apparent, other than because it's not transparent, if you build up a few coats it does become solid, but it does allow you to at least create the necessary detail points, especially lower down in the model where the zenithal is a little bit darker, and you tend to see the brighter red more effectively once you've got your dot spots and lines all placed on it. And again, trying chromatically, this time we went in with a dark purple speed paint, and it took quite a few applications to actually get some color. It tended to bleed out and was quite transparent. I didn't mix this one with black thinking it looked dark enough out of the bottle, but clearly it would have benefited perhaps with having a little bit of a darker tone or pigment in there just to build it up. But hey, it's sort of a bit of practice, get your hand in, having to reapply and reapply. And this time round we decided to put some yellow over as a dry brush as that final detail, again making sure it was quite dry, and you can see that it quickly oranges up where it goes over, but it adds a bit of character and detail onto the model once you're done. And placing them together, it's a matter of which one you think works the best. In terms of the color scheme, I think they're all somewhat effective. The yellow and green certainly is quite unique. The brown and orange one looks more like a hornet, to be honest, rather than a wasp, and the red one, well, it's red. But they worked relatively well, and it was certainly a good exercise rather than going with the generic, here's another Tyranid in pink and purple. So hopefully this has been a bit entertaining, and it's given you a few ideas on how you might be able to paint your own models. But once again, thanks for watching, and hope to see you in the next one.